Hey listeners, welcome to
C.T.S,
otherwise known as the Christian Theology Students Podcast, where today we ask you how much thought you put into heresies and specifically adoptionism.
Yeah, and before we get into that, let me introduce our hosts. We have Jennifer and Sarah and me, Shekinah. And I have to ask you guys, how much do you actually know about adoptionisms?
Like a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I personally know absolutely nothing about adoptionism.
Okay, well, some time ago, I was reading a book that was recommended by my friend, Heresies and How to Avoid Them, Why It Matters What Christians Believe by Wilder Punch. And I think it was actually good because it talks about how adoptionism is the heresy which asserts double sonship in Jesus Christ. As divine, Christ is the Son of God by generation in nature, but as human, he is the Son of God by adoption in grace.
And that means...
Yeah, also on top of that, what does double sonship mean?
Okay, double sonship is the kind of like having two dads. One is important figure who has a lot of authorities and other is just a regular guy. So basically, what they were trying to say is that on the one hand, Jesus was born to be God's son, whilst on the other hand, was also adopted to be God's son. So adoptionism wanted to add their practice alongside the Orthodox belief. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of our lovely listeners actually sent in a Reddit post asking for our thoughts and opinions on adoptionism. User 123 Listen to Me writes, how do I convince my friend that he's wrong about Jesus?
What?
It goes, recently, I, male 23, had a discussion with an ex-friend, male 24, where he mentioned the divinity of Jesus Christ. He believed that Jesus was the Son of God and was originally born a deity. I was so confused because he genuinely believed that Jesus was God the Son, as in a person of the Trinity of God. But I was raised to believe that Jesus was adopted as God's Son through baptism or resurrection. And I told him that he was wrong and that Jesus was not born God's Son. He was just a man who lived a sinless life and was chosen to be God's Son and prophet. I told him his way of thinking implies that there are multiple gods. It is inherently against the monotheistic view. He argued that there is one God, saying God is the Father who creates, God is Jesus who lived among the people, and the Holy Spirit who guides the lives of Christians. We fought about this, and safe to say, we are no longer talking. What do I do? Firstly, you can't convince your friend he's wrong. Like, that's not how that works. So.
Yeah, that's weird.
It is, because the Reddit poster who sent this into us assumes that we'll agree with him, despite it not being a common practice.
Well, actually, I just like how I'm about to agree with the Reddit poster.
Why?
Especially with that title, but he kind of has a point. Maybe not about forcing your beliefs onto another person, but the idea that Jesus was once an ordinary person.
How so?
Well, with my understanding through this post, adoptionist ideas are quite meaningful. Because he is saying that Jesus was born human and not born Son of God, which maintains the uniqueness and oneness of God.
Oh, I feel like he may be missing some of the contradictions in the Reddit post in the same way the guy who wrote it.
Yeah, because actually before this recording, I was studying a few articles online for the past few weeks, and the one that best described adoptionism was called The Person of Jesus Christ, the Essentiality of His Nature Within Christianity. As he talked about the original idea behind adoptionism, it said originally it aimed to highlight Jesus' humanity as well as the uniqueness of his divine nature. This was thought to serve as protection against the idea of blending God with humanity. By Jesus being born an ordinary human and later being adopted by God as a son, they wanted to emphasize the relationship between God and Jesus, as here Jesus is his own person and not an extension of God, as well as maintaining God's transcendence. Also, historically, the belief wanted to combine itself alongside the mainstream Orthodox beliefs. Sometime before 451 AD, it doesn't actually say.
Okay, so is that what you guys were meant when you talked about two fathers?
Kind of.
So you mentioned there's two fathers. One was important, and then the other was just a regular guy. Okay, so basically, this regular dad is the human side of Jesus.
Mm.
And then the important figure is God, Jesus' divine side. He was born human, but was later adopted. by the divine God, one human father and one divine father. So what did you guys call that? Double skinship?
Double what? Wait, I think you mean double sonship.
Double sonship. Okay, yeah, sorry, double sonship.
Yeah. But just remember, double sonship is not a term adoptionists use, could use, but rather it's how mainstream Christians used to describe adoptionist belief.
Yeah.
I read something similar to that earlier article that mentioned how people were so against adoptionism because it went against the fundamental of orthodox Christians. Like you mentioned, for one, it went against the idea of the Virgin Mary because it emphasized the humanity of Jesus. Jesus was born as regular man, and it also went against the doctrine of Trinity because in the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are just the extensions of God.
Yeah.
Right? One God. The adoptionist idea that Jesus was adopted at a specific time disrupts eternal nature in the Trinity.
Which is why the Orthodox Church didn't accept adoptionism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also likely why adoptionism isn't a common practice in mainstream Christian practice, and it isn't really common in anything you see in the world. The idea may have changed a little bit. So the Reddit poster believes that adoptionism should be separated from mainstream beliefs, despite it originally wanting to work alongside the Orthodox Church.
And with current beliefs of adoptionism, you mentioned that is no longer common, but do you know if there are some parts of it that are still being used?
Yeah, actually, so interestingly enough, there are still quite loose connections of adoptionism being used in mainstream media. Although it is no longer directly seen as a theological heresy, specifically by the church, it's seen more symbolically to present ideas of family, compassion, and that sort of thing.
This actually reminds me of a movie I watched recently. It's pretty popular, so you might know it. It's called The Blind Side. Yeah, so I guess it seems similar to what you were just talking about. So in a symbolic sense, the American was adopted into this family as their relationship often presented themes of acceptance and change, which in today's society would be the current interpretation of adoptionism.
Yeah, pretty much. Adoptionism that fits modern day society, although a very indirect idea of adoptionism. But
Okay.
still adoptionism.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I guess that wraps up our conversation pretty well.
Yeah, and back to that Reddit post, this is directed at the user. Maybe you shouldn't convince your friend their beliefs are wrong, but instead focus and look at your own beliefs. So.
Yeah, focus, and you have to focus and learn about the history of adoptionism. Yeah, before you go out and preach.
Yeah, make sure you actually understand what you're talking about before you generalize like I did.
Anyways, I guess that's it. See you next weekend as we open up a new discussion of different heresies. If you want to find out which ones we're talking about, which you should, because it'll be really interesting, stay tuned and join us again.
Bye.